excited to be here. As Brenda said, I've been here before. I love coming to talk with you guys. You're always such a great group, very interested in nutrition, which makes me happy. So I wanted to just kind of cover some of the basics. So Brenda was mentioning, people are always curious, what should I be eating? I'm sure you're seeing a lot of ads and promotions. I know I am, and it can get really confusing. There's a lot of information out there in the world, and it can get a little overwhelming at times when you're trying to decide, what do I need to do to keep myself healthy, to prevent problems, to manage problems, and all that. So my objectives for today, I want to go over the dietary guidelines for Americans. I'm sure you've probably heard of it. You might not know exactly what it consists of. So we're going to talk about that a little bit. Talk about what nutrient-dense foods are versus processed foods, what those criteria are to differentiate those two. We're going to talk about my plate and healthy eating, how to pick foods from each food group. I did have a request to talk about celiac disease, so I do have some slides on that as well. And then we're going to talk about just setting and achieving health goals, how to implement a healthy lifestyle. Maybe you're already doing great, you want to add one or two things in, that's great, I'm here to help with that. There will be time at the end for questions. You can also feel free to ask me questions as we go, as it sparks your questions. All right, so quick show of hands. How many people are familiar with what the dietary guidelines for Americans are? A little bit, you heard of it, don't really know what it is. Okay, so I'm going to talk about it then. So this is a document that comes out every 5 years. It started in 1980, and it was developed by the United States Department of Agriculture and the Department of Health and Human Services to put together all this research, evidence-based information about the benefits of what kinds of foods we should be eating and incorporating into our diets. It's used to evaluate federal food, nutrition, and health policies in our programs, and it also serves as the basis for a lot of our educational materials. We as dietitians often look to these guidelines as well because, like I said, it's based on research, it's based on evidence. They're taking all of that information and putting it together into one document. So it's a really quick, easy way to, well, maybe not quick, it's pretty long, but it's a nice way to kind of have everything all together in one spot. I do, on the next slide, have a screenshot of just a couple of basic points. If you are interested, you can access it as well. I have that link there, dietaryguidelines.gov. You can even just search it online. It will come up. So we are currently in the 2020 to 2025 Dietary Guidelines for Americans. So as I said, it's updated every 5 years. This is just a screenshot of the key points. So there's 4 key points here. First is to follow a healthy dietary pattern at every life stage. So this is a bit of a change from our previous 5-year DGA guidelines, in that it focuses more so on every stage of the life cycle, what kinds of things we should be incorporating, which nutrients we need to focus on. Number 2, we want to make sure that we're focusing on meeting dietary guidelines while also taking culture and food insecurity into account. So culture and food insecurity are 2 areas that are going to impact the foods that we're choosing. You know, you might not realize it directly, but it definitely plays a role. Your environment, how you were brought up, heritage, those are all going to impact the foods you're choosing. So those are things we're taking into consideration as well. I'll mention this a few times, but there isn't any one way that everyone should eat it. It's going to look different for everybody because we're all different. And so as a dietitian, that is a large part of our job is, like I said, taking this information, implementing it in a way that's going to work best for each individual. There's also, number 3 here is focusing on leading food groups with nutrient-dense foods and beverages and staying within calorie limits. So we want to make sure we're getting a variety of fruits and vegetables, getting whole grains, low-fat dairy or dairy alternatives, lean protein, and that word nutrient-dense I'm going to talk about a little bit more in the next couple slides. Number 4, we want to limit things that we tend to get excess within our community and our culture. So we want to watch our sodium, our saturated fat intakes, added sugars, and alcohol. So those are things we're trying to reduce, while as all those other things, the fruits, vegetables, whole grains, protein, dairy, we want to make sure we're getting sufficient amounts of. So nutrition guidelines have kind of shifted a bit over the years. How many people remember this picture here, this food pyramid? I know I remember that, right? So that came out decades ago. It has changed a bit. Is anyone familiar with this My Pyramid picture? This was short-lived. This came out, I remember when I was in college. That's, I think, the only reason I know what it is. But basically, we've kind of realized that this is a little confusing. It's kind of hard to implement. This was an attempt at making it a little bit easier to see. All foods are on the same level. All foods are important. they incorporated some physical activity here, but it's still hard to implement, right? So we've landed on this My Plate diagram, which has been in place since 2011. It's based on the 2010 dietary guidelines for Americans. And I like that one because it's user-friendly, right? It gives us an idea of portion sizes. Same idea that all foods are important, all foods are represented there within our 5 food groups. But it gives you a little bit more of a concept of how much of each food to be eating at each meal and snack. So that term nutrient-dense foods, which I mentioned within that dietary guidelines page, basically when it comes down to it, the nutrients we're finding in foods are, we've got carbohydrates, protein, and fats, which are our macronutrients, right? Those we're going to eat in larger amounts. They're going to make up the majority of our diets. And then we've got vitamins and minerals, which are those micronutrients, which we still need. They're just as important, but we need smaller doses of them. Those are the nutrients that are going to be found in foods. A nutrient-dense food is going to have much higher amounts of each of these nutrients. Versus a food that is non-nutrient dense might have a lot of sugar, a lot of saturated fat, the things we're trying to limit, and maybe doesn't have a lot of those micronutrients, might be lacking in protein and fiber. And looking at nutrition labels, you'll be able to tell the difference between a nutrient-dense food and a food that's not so nutrient-dense. I did want to touch on what a processed food is, just for comparison. So the term processed is kind of a buzzword. You probably hear it a lot, right? A lot of people saying to avoid processed foods. There is actually a spectrum of processed foods. All processed foods aren't necessarily something we need to limit. Certain ones, sure, we want to limit, but not all of them are inherently bad. So a processed food is a food that has undergone any changes to its natural state, such as washing, milling, pasteurizing, canning, chopping, dehydrating, mixing, fortifying, and packaging, to name a few. Basically, every food that we're eating is processed to some extent, right? It has to be in order for us to access it and to eat it, right? You can't just take wheat out of the field and chomp on it. You're going to make it into bread probably, or some other product, right? You take a fruit, an apple off the tree, you're going to wash it. That is processing. So that term is, like I said, not always necessarily bad. And here is that spectrum. So an unprocessed food is one that has undergone processing to make it shipping and store ready, but remains recognizable as the original ingredient, remains as a single ingredient on the ingredient list. So for example, whole fruits and vegetables, shelled raw nuts, the shelling process is processing, right? Eggs, fish, and cuts of meat, whole cuts of meat. So those would be considered unprocessed foods. One step further, we have minimally processed foods. So those are foods that have undergone processing to aid in the maintenance of its nutritional quality and to extend shelf life, which is pretty helpful, right? The ingredient list remains short and without added sugars, fillers, or preservatives. So for example, that would be frozen fruits and vegetables, canned vegetables and beans, dried fruits, dry roasted nuts, ground meats. Those are all still great components of a healthy diet, right? They're prepared in a way that makes it a little bit more convenient for us. We maybe do a little less work. And if that's going to help you to follow a healthy diet, that's a great choice. One step further, we have processed foods. So that's the combination of unprocessed and minimally processed foods to create a new product. The ingredient list remains short. So for example, natural peanut butter would be a processed food. Pastas, canned meats, sprouted breads, those would all be considered processed foods. Still not necessarily something to avoid though, right? Can still be a really great part of a healthy diet, depending on what it is. But for the most part, processed foods are probably still a good component to include in your day. Then we get to those ultra-processed or highly processed foods. This is the category we more specifically want to be limiting. And that's because these things tend to come in packages. They have very long shelf lives, but the ingredient list can be quite long, and they often contain a lot of ingredients, including preservatives, added sugars, fats, and sodiums, right? In moderation, those foods can still fit into a healthy diet. It's all about balance, right? But those are the things that we want to try and limit because they don't have quite as much nutritional density as the other foods in the other categories. So as I mentioned, I consider processed to be a nutrition buzzword. You're probably hearing it a lot, but based on that information, it's not necessarily something to inherently cross off your list, right? If you find frozen vegetables to be the best way for you to incorporate a vegetable into your diet, that's a great choice. You can buy frozen brown rice. cooks 3 minutes in the microwave versus cooking on the stove for 30 minutes, right? It's a great way to incorporate that food, which is a very healthy food to include in your day, without having to stand over the stove for quite as long. Some other buzzwords that I hear a lot would even be diet, right? Diet kind of takes on some negative connotations sometimes. A diet is just the way we eat. It's not necessarily a bad thing, but a lot of times we tend to associate it with restriction, eliminating things, and losing weight. But necessarily, it's not a bad thing. It's just what we're eating. Even healthy can kind of take on a couple of different meanings because health means different things to different people. So what's healthy for one person might look a little different for you in terms of what your health goals are. Even the words good and bad. We are in this habit as a culture of assigning a morality to foods, right? Foods aren't good or bad. Foods are all good for us. They're all fine to eat. Like I said, it comes down to how much you're eating and when you're eating them. And the words detox, cleanse, and even sugar. Those are things that get thrown around a lot that we tend to associate with healthy eating, but it kind of depends on the situation. Marketing companies will use these words a lot of times to get us to purchase things. So just knowing that it might not necessarily be what you need to meet your health goals, it helps you to stay a little bit more cognizant and pay more attention to the foods that you're choosing. So before I get into food groups, choosing foods, I found this quote and I love it because I resonate with it so much. It says, "No one food in one dose will cause chronic disease or cure it." There is no one miracle food, and there is no one food that's going to completely derail everything, right? Ultimately, it all comes down to, in its entirety, what your diet looks like. And every day it's going to be a little bit different, and that's okay. But ultimately, we want to make sure we're getting a variety, we're finding that balance that works best for ourselves as an individual, and that's where you're going to find your success. So there are a lot of different diets out there. Like I said, marketing, advertising, you're going to see a lot of things available. And as I said, there isn't any one eating pattern that's exactly perfect for every single person. It's going to look a little different for each of us, and that's a good thing. We're all different people. We have different likes, dislikes, allergies, intolerances, heritage. All those things are going to contribute to the foods that we're choosing. I will say, any diet that restricts a lot, eliminates food groups, anything like that, that's going to be really hard to maintain long term. You're at risk for not meeting nutritional needs if you are restricting food groups in particular. You might be falling short on some of your micronutrients or even macronutrients. And ultimately, it's not going to support long-term lifestyle changes, which is what we want to see, right? Following something very specific for a month or two, finding success with it, and then going back to your old habits, not necessarily the best way to promote long-term health, right? So it is something that we want to work towards gradually, and incorporating all 5 food groups is a really important way of making sure we're meeting our nutritional needs, or at least having them represented. So our 5 food groups, based on that My Plate picture I showed before, which I will show again, we have grains, fruits, vegetables, low-fat dairy, and lean protein, right? So those are our 5 food groups. All food groups have different nutrients our bodies need to function at its best, so we do want to make sure we're getting each of those represented in there. Eating regularly throughout the day is also a really important way to make sure you're meeting your nutritional needs, for a couple reasons. Like I said, different food groups have different nutrients, but also we want to make sure that you're meeting your calorie needs, your protein needs, you even need fat, right? We want to meet hydration needs, and all of that is going to be a lot easier if you are eating regularly throughout the day. Not necessarily 3 meals a day. Again, it's going to depend on the person. Some people like smaller, more frequent meals. It's really up to you and your lifestyle, what works best for you. But eating regularly throughout the day is a great way to help to sustain your energy levels, can sustain your blood sugars, and it can ultimately help you to have more control over your food choices. So a lot of times I see people who go all day long without eating. They eat a big dinner, and then after dinner, they can't stop snacking. They keep looking for foods. They're hungry. They need energy. And it's because they've been depriving themselves all day, and they're lacking in energy and a lot of nutrients. So if you're incorporating more of those things during the day, by the end of the night, you won't necessarily have that crazy urge to snack and to find extra foods, which, like I said, will make you more in control of your food choices ultimately. It's okay to snack, snacking's okay, but if you find that you're really craving things, you're feeling out of control, maybe that's preventing you from reaching health goals, eating regularly throughout the day is a great first step to kind of help to control that. Our 5 food groups, fruits and vegetables. That's an area that I think a lot of people could work on. We have a quarter of the plate as protein, and the other quarter as grains, and we have dairy up here in the corner. So I'm going to go through each of these food groups one by one to talk about what to look for when you're choosing those foods and some of the health benefits associated with them as well. So I'll start with protein. So protein is an important macronutrient. Like I said, it's one of those macronutrients that our bodies need. It's going to help to support muscle maintenance, muscle growth. We want to make sure we're choosing leaner protein options because those will be lower in saturated fat. So things like chicken, turkey, fish, those are all great options. You can also find much leaner beef and pork options now too. You can buy 90% lean ground beef, which would be lower in that saturated fat as well. The reason we want to limit saturated fat is it does put us at risk for cardiac issues if eaten in larger amounts. It will raise the LDL cholesterol, that cholesterol we're trying to keep under control. So by choosing these leaner proteins, you're going to ultimately reduce your saturated fat intakes. There are also a lot of plant-based options out there now. Naturally, we have nuts, seeds, legumes. Those are all really great sources of protein that often have a lot of fiber, not to mention that lower saturated fat as well. There are also some meat-free products out there. We've got the Beyond Burgers, right? We've got a lot of plant-based fake chicken, things like that. Those are fine to incorporate as well. We do still want to make sure we're reading the nutrition labels on those items. Sometimes they can still have quite a bit of sodium or even saturated fat, believe it or not. But they can be incorporated as well. Some brands are a little bit better than others, so you want to make sure you're looking at that label. And the way that we're preparing these protein foods is a factor as well. Frying foods will ultimately increase the fat content, right? Depending on what kind of oil you're using, it might not necessarily be saturated fat, but choosing baking, broiling, braising, even air frying would be lower fat ways of preparing these foods. Next, we have grains and starches. So this is that quarter of the plate, right? So of course, grains would include things like rice, pasta, breads, cereals, but this would also include those starchy vegetables like potatoes, corn, peas. Those are vegetables, of course, but they do have a high starch content. So we consider them in this quarter of the plate instead of on that vegetable side. When looking for a bread, for example, or a pasta, we use the slogan, make half your grains whole. So throughout the course of the day, it is good to have a goal to try and make at least half of those grains whole grains. The way you know that a food is a whole grain is by looking at that ingredient list. So you want that first ingredient to say whole grain and then whatever type of flour it is. Whole grain wheat flour, if it's a wheat bread, for example. Wheat bread is not necessarily whole wheat bread. We do want to look at that label. Wheat bread, white bread, basically the difference is the fiber content. So the more a grain is processed, the more of the natural nutrition is taken out of it. We're going to lose some fiber, we're going to lose some of those vitamins and minerals. So by choosing a bread, for example, that has more of its natural components, it's going to be higher in fiber. It'll probably have a little bit of protein in it too, and more of its natural nutritional content. Speaking of fiber, this is something that, like I said, a lot of people could probably benefit from increasing their fruits and vegetables and whole grains in general. Reason being, fiber has been shown to have so many health benefits. It's good for our heart, it helps to keep us regular, it can reduce inflammation, and by choosing more of those fruits, vegetables, whole grains, we're going to inherently increase our fiber intake as well. So the goal for adult women is 25 grams a day. The goal for men is 35 grams per day. On average, the American adult eats about 10 to 13 grams of protein daily. So a lot of us would benefit from gradually increasing these things. And it is something we want to do gradually. If you were to go from that 10 or 13 grams of fiber a day up to your 25 the next day, you'll probably have some GI upset, right? So we do want to take it slow, increase a couple of grams every couple days, and you want to make sure you're also increasing your hydration, drinking lots of fluids. Because in order for fiber to do its job, it needs that water there too. Right? So we have two different kinds of fiber. We have soluble and insoluble. Insoluble fiber just kind of pushes everything through our system. Think of bran, for example, right? Soluble fiber attracts water to our bowels and kind of keeps everything moving that way. So if that water isn't there in our bodies, it might not have the effect that you want it to have. So be aware of your hydration if you are going to work on increasing your fiber. So this is where I'm going to talk about celiac disease a little bit. As Brenda said, it was a topic of conversation, so I did want to cover it. Feel free, you can talk to me afterwards too if anybody has any more specific questions. Disease is an autoimmune condition in which the body reacts to gluten. So gluten is a protein naturally found in barley, rye, and wheat. It's not naturally found in oats, but oats are often prepared in facilities that process gluten-containing products. So in that case, we do consider oats just to be safe. Basically, gluten just kind of gives dough that elasticity. It kind of helps with texture. It keeps everything together. If anyone's ever eaten gluten-free bread, they tend to be a little crumbly because it doesn't have that gluten in there. There are specific populations that need to avoid gluten. Celiac disease, of course, would be one of them. So I have here just common sources of gluten on this page here. So obviously breads, cereals, baked goods, anything that's using a wheat flour, crackers, croutons, flours, pasta, stuffings, and dressings. There are also items, processed items, that might contain gluten even if you don't suspect it. So for example, brown rice syrup, candy, energy bars, just to name a few, salad dressings. It can be in a lot of different things. So if this is something you have to limit, you do want to be very aware of it. You want to be checking those ingredient lists. Some companies will put on their label gluten-free. Some companies, if a food is naturally gluten-free, they might not include it. That doesn't mean it's not gluten-free. You gotta do a little bit of research. So there is a difference between the autoimmune condition of celiac disease and a gluten intolerance, right? So these are two groups of people that would want to limit or avoid gluten. In the case of celiac disease, like I said, it's an autoimmune condition, so your body is having an immune reaction to that gluten. It causes damage to the small intestine. It damages those little villi we have in our intestine, which help with nutrient absorption. So over time, if that damage is continually happening, it can lead to some malabsorption issues because your intestine is not as capable of absorbing nutrients that you're consuming. And celiac disease is diagnosed with blood tests, biopsies, and other general marker tests. This is versus gluten sensitivity. Now, gluten sensitivity is not as well defined. There is no damage that's happening to the body physically when gluten is consumed. It's more of just a GI upset or discomfort. A lot of the symptoms of these two things can be quite similar. We'll talk about that. And the only way to diagnose a gluten sensitivity is just by trying a gluten-free diet and see if it helps. It's not as specific as with the celiac disease. So symptoms of celiac disease or gluten intolerance, like I said, a lot of them are the same. Honestly, a lot of these are the same for a lot of intolerances, so it can get a little tricky. Abdominal pain, bloating, constipation, diarrhea, vomiting, elevated liver function tests, those AST and ALT, can cause joint pain, fatigue, among other things. I have a picture here of what that gluten can do to our intestines. So here we have a normal healthy intestine. These are these villi that help to absorb nutrients within our intestine as nutrients pass through. Over time, gluten in celiac disease, because of that immune reaction, will damage those, and this is why it becomes harder for the body to absorb nutrients because it isn't capable, just because of that inflammation in the immune response. So it is very serious. People with celiac disease do need to absolutely avoid gluten, even if they're not having symptoms. If you are diagnosed with celiac disease, that damage is happening, and we want to avoid that. I will say, if you do not have gluten sensitivity or celiac disease, gluten itself is not bad, right? It's okay to eat. It's just a protein found in foods naturally, right? So if you don't have any reason not to eat it, it's absolutely fine to include in your day. The presence or absence of gluten alone is not related to diet quality. Sometimes the term gluten-free is considered health food, right? If you see it on a label, we're kind of inclined to think, oh, that's better for me. Not necessarily. A lot of times, in fact, if companies are taking something out of a food, they're putting a lot of other stuff into it to help with that texture and taste, to make sure it's still something that people find appealing. So you really still need to be looking at those labels. So for example, I have a gluten-free brownie here. Total fat content in this one brownie is 25% of our daily value. Sodium is at 10%. There's a decent amount of fiber, 7%. only 3 grams of protein, and there's 34 grams of sugar. If we look at that ingredient list, the first ingredient is sugar and the second ingredient is oil, right? So someone who needs to avoid gluten, absolutely, go for it. And even people who don't need to avoid gluten, that's fine to eat, but it is a food that we still want to limit, right? Eliminating gluten-containing foods can also affect the other micronutrients that you're getting. So, like I said, gluten is naturally found in wheat, barley, rye. Those kinds of products tend to have a lot of B vitamins, zinc, folate, magnesium, selenium. So by eliminating those foods, there is the risk of also not getting as many of those micronutrients as we need. We do need to make sure we're getting them elsewhere. If you think you have a gluten digestion disorder, it can be helpful to keep a food log to help to identify any foods that might be causing those intolerance symptoms that you're having. You do want to make an appointment with your doctor, and don't necessarily eliminate gluten without talking to someone if you think you have celiac disease, because it can actually affect the diagnosis, right? It's an autoimmune reaction. We need that immune response to be able to identify that there is a problem. So definitely seek out some advice from a doctor before jump-starting anything. Okay, so next we have fruits and vegetables. So like I showed on that My Plate picture, half the plate is fruits and vegetables. Ideally, we want to strive for 2 servings of fruit per day and 3 servings of vegetable per day minimum. So typically 2 to 3 of fruit, 3 to 5 of vegetables. A serving is, in general, 1 cup of raw or a half cup cooked of either of those items, or like a small apple, a small orange. Those would each be 1 serving. We want to make sure we're getting a variety of fruits and vegetables because different colors need different nutrients, different antioxidants. So by incorporating a variety of colors, we're also getting a variety of nutrients and antioxidants and phytochemicals and all those wonderful things that help to prevent problems. You do not have to eat organic fruits and vegetables to get these benefits. Those nutrients, those antioxidants, all of those health benefits are within fresh, frozen, canned, organic, non-organic. All fruits and vegetables have these benefits. So don't feel like it's something you have to do. You don't have to buy organic. If you like to, go for it. That's awesome. If that's not in your budget, that's okay too. Ultimately, we just want to make sure you're eating them however it is that you like them, however you can access them. All right, so move along to dairy. So dairy products, just like with our protein options, we want to be choosing the lower fat items just because they're going to be lower in saturated fat, right? So choosing 1% or skim for milks, yogurts, cheeses, those are all naturally going to be lower in saturated fat versus like a whole milk, for example. There are a lot of non-dairy options out there now. We've got almond milk, oat milk, soy milk, right? There's tons of them. We've got yogurts made from those dairy alternatives. Those are all fine too. We do want to make sure we're watching the sugar content. So if you do like, let's say almond milk, for example, we want to choose the unsweetened version because those flavored ones can have a lot of added sugars. They do now make unsweetened vanilla, which is a nice compromise, right? So it doesn't have the added sugars, it's got a little extra vanilla taste. That's totally fine. We do also want to watch sodium, so that would apply more to cheeses, cottage cheese, right? So there are some cheeses that are naturally lower in sodium, things like mozzarella, Swiss cheese. Those are naturally going to be lower in sodium if that's something you are paying more attention to. You know, in general, we want to make sure we're not getting excessive amounts. It's still okay to have some other cheeses too, right? We just want to watch the portion, just like all of our other foods. So when we're looking at nutrition labels, a couple of things I like to point out because it can be a lot to look at. First, you want to look at the serving size. Sometimes the serving size is different than the amount we're eating, right? So if you're eating double the serving size, we have to double everything else on here to represent what you're actually taking in. That might be okay, that's totally fine. Within more recent years, companies were required to adjust their serving sizes to more accurately reflect the average amount people consume at a time. So it used to, you look at a bottle of soda, for example, and you're like, oh, it's only got, 15 grams of sugar, but that was for a quarter of the bottle. Now, if a bottle's about this big, it's going to be for the whole bottle. So we've got a better idea, a quick glance of what we're actually taking in, which is great. Not as confusing. In terms of things to limit, we want to watch out, like we mentioned in the beginning, those saturated fats. We want to watch our sodium, cholesterol, and added sugars. So as just a quick guide, I like to use the percent daily values over here. So if you look at this right side of the label, for those things, just the things we want to limit, 5% or less would be a good number to look for. Let's it's a little bit more, 7%, that's okay. Instead of me telling you the grams and the milligrams and all that stuff for each thing, which can get confusing when you're standing in the grocery store, right? 5% or less is just a good barrier to, marker to determine if a food is ultimately something that you want to include more often or less often. We also want to make sure we're checking the ingredient list too, right? So ingredients are listed in terms of volume. So the more of something that is present in that item, it's going to be listed more towards the top. And as the ingredient list goes down, there's less of those things. So if we have sugar, for example, as one of those first few ingredients, it's probably going to be quite high in sugar, and that's something we're going to want to limit. And it's not always going to be black and white, right? Because all foods are going to have different amounts of all of these macronutrients. It's going to have different carbs, protein, fat. Ultimately, it's going to depend on how you're eating this item. And I don't know what this item is. I would guess it's a cereal based on the information here. So yes, the sugar is a little bit high, but if you're pairing it with a little extra protein, a little extra fiber, maybe you're putting in some fruit, you're gonna have a hard-boiled egg on the side, you've got, you know, a low-fat milk with some extra protein, that can still be a balanced meal, right? The sugar is, again, a bit high, so we might want to choose one that's a little bit lower in sugar. But if you really like this one, you're going to have it every once in a while, that's okay. All right, a little bit more on sugar. So sugar is one of those things we want to limit. There's a lot of different words for sugar. So I have a couple listed here. We've got brown sugar, corn syrup, anything ending in OSE, so fructose, glucose, sucrose, those are all different kinds of sugar. Of course, high fructose corn syrup, honey, and agave, I'd like to point out. Although honey and agave are naturally occurring, they're not naturally found in foods, right? So they are still considered an added sugar. Still fine to use in moderation, but just be aware of that. Molasses, malt sugar, there's a lot of different words. Like I said, if it's one of those first few ingredients on the ingredient list, it's probably a food we want to limit, just because it's going to be in a larger quantity. So in terms of sugar, like I said, it's something we want to limit. We don't have to completely avoid it. There is a guideline, in general, maximum of about 25 grams of added sugars per day for women and about 32 grams per day for men, at most. Again, just like with the sodium, start being aware of what you're eating and how much you're taking in. Maybe you're doing great, maybe you're right on the money, maybe there's some room for improvement. Take a look at some of the labels of the foods you're eating consistently, think about how you're preparing your foods, and start to brainstorm if there's anywhere that you can maybe potentially reduce that. Okay, so I like to just kind of touch on other things to add into our diets, because a lot of times we tend to focus on all the stuff we have to take out, right? But there's a lot of really wonderful things we can also add into our meals and our days to improve our health too. So I don't want to forget about that. Omega-3 fatty acids. So these are unsaturated, heart-healthy fats that have been shown to help to raise the good HDL cholesterol. They help to reduce inflammation. They're a great thing to add. A couple examples of foods high in this item would be olive oil, fish, especially salmon and tuna, nuts like walnuts, almonds, avocado, just to name a couple. So adding in some of those heart-healthy unsaturated fats to take the place of those saturated fats that we want to reduce will help us to make sure we're meeting our fat needs, our daily fat needs, while also helping to promote heart health. We want to make sure we're adding in some fiber and water gradually. And food variety. I'm a big believer that you should enjoy what you're eating. You should enjoy the foods that you're preparing and choosing. Ultimately, it's going to help with long-term success, right? If you're constantly depriving yourself of things that you like, it's very hard to continue that eating pattern long-term. So by including variety, having fun with your recipes, using all of this information I'm providing and adapting it in a way that works best for you, that's where we're going to find the key to success. Incorporating exercise. I like to use the word movement just because it doesn't have to take place in a gym. You don't have to go to a gym to exercise, right? You can go outside, you can do things at home, you can watch videos, you can do yoga. There's so many different ways of moving our bodies in a way that works best for you, right? Just like with our food choices, our movement choices are going to look different from each person because we have different preferences and different abilities. As long as you're striving to incorporate more movement into your day, you're doing a good thing for your body. The goal is to reach about 150 minutes per week, so whether that's 30 minutes 5 days a week, however you break it up. There's a lot of cardiovascular benefits, obviously it can help with weight maintenance, even mental and emotional health. You know, it can do a lot for us in terms of health. And adequate sleep is also something that's largely important for our bodies in general, right? So getting adequate sleep is going to help to promote our energy levels. If you're not sleeping enough consistently, you might find yourself gravitating towards some of those quicker energy sources, right? Those simple carbohydrates, because your body's craving that energy because it didn't get enough sleep. We've also found that adequate sleep consistently can help to reduce cortisol levels, that stress hormone. It can help to reduce the risk of developing diseases and cancers. So setting aside time to make sure you're getting ideally 7 to 8 hours a night really makes a big difference. And I know it's easier said than done. Sleep is something that a lot of people do struggle with. My recommendation is to try to set up a habit, follow a schedule, try to go to sleep at the same time each night, wake up at the same time each morning, no matter what day of the week it is, weekends and weekdays. It can help to signal to your body that it's time to rest. Even, you know, drinking chamomile tea, something like that can help to get your body into that mindset to actually rest and relax. It's very restorative sleep, so we want to make sure we're getting enough of that. Now, when it comes to setting goals, a couple things I like to promote. So we want to make sure we're being realistic and being specific. So I have an example here. I will reduce my soda consumption from 4 cans per day to 2 cans per day. Could we go from 4 to 0? Of course. Would that be hard to do? Probably, right? Maybe you do it for a short period of time, and then you crave it so much, you end up going back to it. You don't have to go from 4 to 0. Gradual progress is good. That's what we want to see, right? You don't have to completely jump from one extreme to the next. Working towards a goal is excellent, and you're more likely to continue it long term. You want to also focus on what you can add in, right? Like I said, try not to only focus on the things you need to change and reduce. Promote some other health promoting behaviors by adding items in. So for example, I will include 1 serving of vegetables with dinner 3 nights per week. Could you do it every night of the week? Of course. Would you do it every night of the week if it's not something you're used to doing? Maybe not. And if you missed a day, would you beat yourself up about it? That's what we want to try and avoid, right? So by setting a more realistic goal of just 3 nights a week, you're more likely to achieve it, feel good about yourself, and continue it. And then from there, you can add in more nights. You want to also include short-term goals as well as long-term goals. So, for example, I want to do a 5K next year. I'll start by walking for 15 minutes, 3 days each week. Could you do a longer period of time, more days per week? Of course. But if it's not something you're currently doing, it might be hard to sustain it, right? So by starting with a 5K next year, that's a short-term goal. And then from there, you know, maybe I'll do a half marathon in a couple years. That's a long-term goal. Keeps us motivated and keeps us working forward. No matter what, whenever you're setting a goal, you want to continue to reassess and make adjustments based on how things are going. I know I'm over time, I'm sorry. I included a couple of slides about weight just because weight is often a common focus when we're talking about nutrition. I talked a lot about balanced eating today, not completely eliminating foods or food groups because it can be difficult to maintain. So I just kind of wanted to touch on this, something that I see a lot. So weight cycling, which is also called yo-yo dieting. So it's a pattern of losing weight and then regaining it. So you know, someone wants to lose 10 pounds, they go on a very restrictive diet, they lose their 10 pounds, they go back to their habits, they gain 15, right? It's this constant pattern of gaining and losing, and often gaining more than what was originally lost that we see a lot. This is associated with an increased body fat composition, specifically belly fat, and it has been shown to increase the likelihood of future weight gain. That's why we want to try and avoid those extremes. Right? We want to work towards slow progress, gradual changes, because this is less likely to happen. You're more likely to find long-term success and just feel better mentally and emotionally because you're not beating yourself up about things, right? Staying away from this restrictive mindset is important for our mental and emotional health. Seeing foods as good or bad, right? That moral component to food that we kind of assign it that we shouldn't. Eliminating foods or food groups entirely, eating the same foods every day because you feel that they're a healthy food, sticking to a rigid set of eating rules. This can lead to those feelings of shame and guilt, and you should not feel shame or guilt for eating food. Ultimately, this is an unhealthy relationship with food, right? Even if you're eating foods that you consider healthy, if you're not feeling good in here, then you're not healthy. So that's why we really come at this from a balanced eating perspective, and why we as dietitians work with people as individuals, because everyone's going to be different. We can make a lot of, general recommendations, but if you are finding that you struggle with implementing those general recommendations, you can always meet with one of us one-on-one to speak more specifically about your needs and your goals. I do have information about if you are interested in making an appointment. Of course, there's no pressure, but we are available outpatient. Many insurances do cover it, so I actually brought some of these with me. So if you are interested, you can take the phone number, call the scheduling department. You do need a doctor's referral, and I also brought some of my cards. So you can also call our office if you do think of questions, if you want more information about scheduling an appointment or other resources that we have through the hospital. We have a lot. You can always give us a call, and we're happy to direct you any way that is going to help to get you that information.